person and the family and the society interlock, all three. Obviously, God designed the family. That's it. We have the faith we know. He designed the family from the time of Adam and Eve onwards. He designed the person from the time of Adam onwards, and he designed society from the moment that there would be children of Adam and Eve and then grandchildren, and then the human beings would spread all over the world. In principle, this is a family conference for families, but the problems of the society, of society, are very pressing at the moment, and especially of the society sympathetic. And so Father Pfeiffer suggested to me it might be wise to say a few more words for you about this crisis of the society. Where's it come from and where's it going to? It comes from good old original sin. I say good old, meaning it's been around for quite a while, ever since Adam and Eve. There's a famous Spanish conservative Catholic writer of the 19th century, Donoso Cortes, who said that all heresies can be traced back to two, and I think he's right. One moment. Don't worry, there's plenty of crayons here. Plenty of them. Just two. Donoso Cortes. Donoso, C-O-R-T-E, and there's, in Spanish it could easily be S or Z maybe, but Cortes. He was born about plus or minus 1800 to plus or minus 1855. He didn't live very long. He began life as a liberal, and then he was in Parliament, brilliant mind, brilliant speaker. He was in Parliament, and the Spanish Parliament, and he converted. He understood the liberalism. He understood what was happening to the world in the wake of the French Revolution. You had yesterday, 1789, the French Revolution, and he understood liberalism, and then he got back to his faith, and he wrote some marvelous things and prophetic things about the way the world would go. And he said, amongst other things, he said that all heresies can be traced back to two: the denial of original sin and the denial of the supernatural. And even those two go together. The denial of original sin and the denial of the supernatural. Original sin. Imagine, here are two comparisons for original sin. Imagine, how many of you have built cards? You built 8, you built 2, 4, 6, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. Who's built cards 8 at a time? A tower of cards. Who hasn't? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. It's very fragile, and it easily collapses. But when it collapses, all of the cards are exactly the same. What's been lost, something real has been lost, the structure, the shape, the appearance, but the actual cards are exactly the same once they collapse on the floor. Original sin is human nature given by God an original structure, so that it was like a house of cards. And it was much less fragile than a house of cards. Adam and Eve were naughty, big time. In order to break the structure, that God gave them as a gift to begin with, they really had to sin. So the sin of Adam and Eve was serious, very serious. Another comparison: a tire. A tire hits a stone. The tire is cut. The rubber is almost exactly the same. The rubber is now split, but the rubber is exactly the same rubber as it was before it was split, only now there's a split. And of course the tire is completely different from what it was. It's unusable. Human nature, when Adam and Eve sinned, they put a hole in the tire, so to speak, and they brought down the house of cards. But the cars are exactly the same, the rubber is exactly the same. In other words, in human nature, there is a nature that stays exactly the same, that stayed exactly the same. The basic nature of Adam and Eve stayed exactly the same, but a structure that God had given it was just no longer there. And there was a puncture, and there's a puncture, and the advantage of this comparison is that you pump the tire up again, but it's going to keep leaking. You're going to have to pump it, keep on pumping to be able to use it. But it'll always keep on leaking. Poor old human nature always keeps on leaking. This Hollywood denies. Hollywood stinks, as they might say in German. Stink. Hollywood is horrible. The philosophy, the ideas, the basic principles behind easily most Hollywood films are heretical and they're naturalistic. Hollywood denies the supernatural. It hasn't got an inkling of the supernatural. When Hollywood does a Catholic film, it just doesn't jive. The few that I've seen, it just doesn't jive, because those film directors of Hollywood, they've not got the faith. They've got no idea what the faith is, or where it's a total dimension which they're completely missing. So, and Hollywood denies original sin. As I said to you, these two, this basic double denial that Donoso Cortes spoke of, you find the two going together. So where the supernatural is denied, the original sin is denied. Because if you deny the supernatural, all that's left is the natural. And if the natural is everything, then it's difficult to believe that it's punctured. It's difficult to believe that it's collapsed. It's only if I have an idea of some much higher order which a man fell from and which man is called back to. So, an idea that every Catholic has. The idea that Adam and Eve fell, and the idea that Jesus Christ came to build us back and enable us to go to heaven. Every Catholic's got that in his head. But without the faith, the supernatural collapses, and then the idea that the nature is sinful collapses. Why does the idea that nature is sinful? Because of pride. Man can't bear to believe that he is not the greatest and the best. If he doesn't believe in God, if he doesn't have an idea of God so that he can see his own smallness and his own sinfulness. Oh, I open a bracket. When people begin to go to the Tridentine Mass, let's say after they've been in the Novus Ordo for a while, you may have noticed some of them, a number of them, begin to attend a few Masses, they like it, but then they don't come any longer. I'll bet you that one reason why is because when they come back to the true Mass, the supernatural begins to open up again. Because the Mass is purely supernatural. Well, not purely, but it's largely supernatural. It's highly supernatural. And so when people begin to go to Mass, they realize, they're reminded, they come back to there being something much more. When there's something much more, and then they look at themselves, I'm going to have to go to confession. The shoe begins to pinch for various reasons. And so they may not go to Mass, they may not stay with the Tridentine Mass, not because they don't like the Mass, but because they know that the opening of that dimension makes them realize that they are sinners. Without that dimension, they could think that they were the cock of the dung heap and that they could walk around, we men, we're the greatest, we're the best, there's nothing above us, and so on and so on. But once they realize again there's God, I begin to see who I am, and I recognize I'm a sinner. So the denial of the supernatural and the denial of original sin go together, and both are heavily denied in today's world. You're living in today's world. I'm sure many of you have seen many Hollywood movies like I have, and it would be difficult for this influence of this naturalism. The error of shutting out the supernatural is called naturalism. It's saying that there is nothing above nature. The order of nature. Somebody once said, and it's a very good way of putting it, nature is what God gives to us of ourselves. Supernature is what God gives to us of himself. Supernature is purely God. It comes from God. It can come from God alone. You and I, by our purely natural strength and forces, we cannot achieve anything of supernature by our purely natural strength. If I have the gift of faith, and if I'm in a state of grace, and if I have charity, then I can achieve merit. Then what I do is meritorious, thanks to the state of grace that I have. But if I don't have the state of grace, there's nothing I can do. I'm an elephant that's fallen into an elephant trap, and I cannot get out of it by myself. God alone can pull me out of the state of sin, out of the state of mortal sin. So, the modern world denies original sin. Denying original sin, it cannot understand. It completely misunderstands life. And blocking out, shutting out the life to come and the world to come, it completely falsifies this little life. I'll give you an example, classic example. Equality, liberty, equality, fraternity. You may remember that was the slogan of the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Before God, we are all equal. Old, young, intelligent, dumb, man, woman, black, white, Jew, Gentile. As St. Paul says, in Christ, we are all, there's neither barbarian nor Greek, neither Scythian nor Jew or Gentile, whatever, as St. Paul says. That's in Christ. That's before God. But before men, amongst men, we're not equal at all. The races are not equal. The regions are not equal. The sexes are not equal. In any way, in everything of the heart, women are generally superior. In everything of the head, men are generally superior. There are always exceptions, of course, to that rule, but they're not equal in anything. But in strength, and so on with the races, God has planted inequality throughout his creation. But at the same time, as far as being born, having to live according to the Ten Commandments, our life of virtue or vice being measured, and coming in front of the judgment seat of God, and eternity, the possibility of hell, the possibility of heaven, in that we are all absolutely equal. In other words, in front of what the liberals are doing, is they're taking an equality which belongs to the next life, which totally belongs to the next life, that belongs to men in front of God. They're taking that equality and they're cramming it, an equality as huge as eternity, and they're cramming it into this little tiny life of 70 years on earth, or 90 years. And the result is it's like trying to jam 8 gallons into a 1 gallon bottle. You're going to burst the bottle. You're going to try, the bottle will finally burst. If you've got the means of forcing it, the bottle will burst. This life bursts by the attempt to make man and woman absolutely equal, for instance. Equal in all respects and absolutely. Interchangeable like the wheels of a motor car. Ridiculous and profoundly wrong. And that's exactly what the enemies of God, the Freemasons, are doing today. They're making the sexes in absolutely, they're jamming. They're taking people's instinct of an equality, which is a true instinct, but it belongs in front of God. In front of God we're all equal. In front of human beings we're not equal. Men have very different talents. There is a certain proportion of men that are born leaders, and it's a minority, and there's a majority of men that are born followers, that don't have the gifts of leading, that are not gifted to be leaders. And it's ridiculous when they try to be. And hence again, another huge foolishness is the principle of democracy. Democracy, whereby everybody can judge just as well as anybody else how society should be conducted, how society should be led. It's a wrong principle. What is needed is, what the church will teach, is that the leaders should lead. The leaders have gifts from God to lead. Duties that go together with the gifts, responsibilities, and lastly, if you like, certain privileges. But in French they used to say noblesse oblige. Nobility, being a noble, is an obligation. Nobility obliges. Being a noble is an obligation. It's a responsibility, and it can be a very heavy responsibility and obligation. Pius X didn't want to be Pope because he knew perfectly well what a huge responsibility it was. He accepted, but he hadn't wanted it. I'm saying that the problem of the society of Pius X, is the problem of original sin. Well, you can trace it that far back, and it does go that far back. But closer to modern times, of course, well, you have it here. You've had it here. What Why did the Protestants break off from the church? Why did the liberals break off from what was there still was a Catholic civilization? Why did the modernists want to fix them? At the bottom of it all is pride. I'm sorry, I'm being very general. I'm not zeroing in on the specific problems of the Society of Pius X. But the problems of the Society of Pius X, the problems that it's now going through are basically as old as the hills. So, what we're up against is pride, the world, the flesh, and the devil. The three enemies. I'm still being very, very general, but you know, it's good old sinfulness. It's sin. What form does that sin take? You're going to. I mean, let's be more specific. Let's get down to the particular case of the SSPX. Well, I think that I've got a name for it, and I call it 50sism. Where have I got my crayon? Lost it. 50sism. And that means 50sism means what's going on in society today is the return of the Catholicism of the 1950s. What was wrong with the Catholicism of the 1950s? The 1960s was a tremendous crash of the church. I think we're all agreed on that. We should be. Vatican II was a tremendous crash. Vatican II was the whole church, was the modern era, the modern eras being made official inside the church. The difference between modernism and neo-modernism was the difference between the era being condemned by the whole church following Pius X and the era being accepted inside the whole church following John the 23rd and Paul VI and John Paul I and so on and so on. John Paul II, I mean. What is the era of the 1950s? What's wrong with the Catholicism of the 1950s? The 1960s was a great crash. Now, if it was a great crash, if it was a great fall, on the one hand, it must have been at a certain height to be able to fall. If you aren't at a certain height, you can't fall. If Vatican II was a great fall, then the church was at a certain height before the crash. On the other hand, if you make a great fall, you must have been standing right on the edge. You were standing in a foolish place, and you were not watching what you were doing, and therefore there was something very wrong with the church. So there was something right with the church of the 1950s, and there was something that was very wrong, because the church of the 1950s generated the crash of the 1960s. What was wrong with the Catholicism of the 1950s, which came back to modernism? Well, we saw it basically yesterday. Protestantism and liberalism and modernism have created a new world. That new world is all around us. That new world of science, of technology, of machines, of industry, of suburbs, of big cities, motor cars, trains, aeroplanes, now space rockets. This glamorous and dazzling new world created by science is a world which basically mocks the Catholic Church. And the example is Galileo. I'm sure all of you have heard, and many times, how the great scientist Galileo was persecuted and imprisoned by the church, and the Catholic Church was backwards and and didn't understand science, didn't like science, doesn't understand the modern world, and so on. You've all of you heard that. So between the modern world, the rising out of Protestantism and liberalism, and the Catholic Church, there's a big clash. Now, the world is glamorous, and the world looks good. Hollywood is glamorous. Hollywood makes errors look good. And so, and people watch films. Think of the suburbs, or think of today's big cities. Think of how popular the internet is. How many people are living off the internet. Now, not everything with the internet is wrong. Obviously, there's a big problem with it. We all know what that problem is. That the most outstanding and immediate and striking problem is the internet. But
the internet goes with rabbit hutch high-rises. Television especially goes with rabbit hutch. It goes with the rabbit hutch way of life. Take the big city. I don't know how many of you live in the big city. The French have a marvelous expression. Métro, boulot, dodo. Which means métro is the underground. Boulot is the work. It's a familiar word for work. I can't think of an equivalent in English. Work. And dodo is sleep. So underground work, sleep. Underground work, sleep. Métro, boulot, dodo is a typical French phrase. Smart. The French are smart. A smart phrase for modern life. A routine in which I enclose myself of, I live in a little rabbit hutch, I take the elevator down, I get into the metro, I go and do a horrible job, pushing papers, insignificant, overheated, work without meaning in effect, little secretaries dancing up and down in short skirts, and the men, etc., 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 etc. A way of life made for adultery, one could say. Am I exaggerating? And back you come to the evening. In that way of life, that is now a structure of modern life. You've got to agree. Many people live like that. And they don't want to be disturbed in that way of life. They come to terms with it, and one way in which they come to terms with it is very much television. Can you imagine living in a rabbit hutch on the 27th floor without television? You hardly know your neighbours. You come to the point of hardly wanting to know your neighbours. They're going to be here today and gone tomorrow. It's not as though you're going to have a great friendship that will last life, because you know they're going to be there gone tomorrow. Therefore, many modern friendships, many modern acquaintances are quite shallow, because you know you're going to move. The population is mobile. You're not living for the whole of your days in one little village, which as so many people used to do. People used to be attached to the land. The farmer almost grew roots through his feet into the soil of his farm. He knew the acres, he knew the fields, he knew the streams, he knew the trees, he knew his own farm, he knew it very well. And you couldn't pull him off it, so to speak. Today, you know, the tractors, these huge combines, chase across these fields, and one man sitting in a superheated cabin with Hollywood films in the cabin can harvest all that's needed for the whole village to eat for the whole winter in a few hours. It's a completely different way of life. It's living in the city amongst men with man-made things. Everything is man-made. The blacktop, the cars, the lampposts, the high-rises, the concrete, the steel, the glass. It's all man-made. Out in the country, it's all God-made. The trees, the stream, a lot of it is God-made. There are some handmade things. Even a wooden plough is handmade. But the horse, the manure, you don't use chemicals, you use manure. Manure is precious in the old-fashioned country. Now, I'm not romanticizing the old way of life. What I'm saying here and now is it's very, very different from the big city way of life. And now, even the country becomes cityfied. The country becomes mortgages, banks, taking out a huge loan for a big machine. Somebody was describing me to the other day how in order to be able to live on the land today, you have to 10 farmers. One farmer has to have this machine, one farmer has to have that machine. The machines are so expensive that they can't, one farmer can't own all these machines without being a millionaire. And he's going to have it in the barn, he's going to use it for just 2 weeks at the most, and then the rest of the year it's not used. So what makes sense is for one farmer to have the machine, that one farmer to have the machine, and between the 10 of them, the families are made to live in society, the farmers are made to live and work, the machines force the farmers to live and work together. But then, as you now know, the huge city corporations are coming in on the countryside, and they're changing God's corn, they're changing God's wheat, they're changing everything. The bees are now dying because of the insecticides. Nature is violated. Man is no longer in tune with nature. The world is too much with us, latent, soon. Getting and spending we lay waste our powers. Too little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. Wordsworth was writing around 1800. Around 1800, the English poet was realizing that the contact with nature is being lost. He stands by the ocean side and he's looking at the sea. Great God, it moves us not. I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. Now a man stands on the seaside and he watches the sea and he says, that would make a good salt plant, or a desalination plant. I wonder what the density of that water is, 2.5 or 2.7? I might make a marina here and make a lot of money. His mind is turning in completely material things. The beauty, God's beauty, something, again the same poet, something far more deeply interfused, he's lost. It's just not there. And that's why he, standing by the seaside, he imagines, he said, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. I'd rather be a wretched old pagan. At least I would still believe in the gods of the sea. I'd believe in something more than just H2O and H2SO4 and chemistry and physics and all of that. But no, we have given our hearts away a sordid boon, he says. And so that's 1800, and the world has been going in that direction ever since. The result is now these huge cities in which make a total environment, and the getting into a motor car, cranking the ignition, driving on blacktop into the city amidst a terrible traffic jam, all of this horrible traffic, the fumes, the impatience, the road rage. It's a way of life. It's a total way of life. And it's a way of life that is not in harmony with God, in harmony with the things of God. It's not a way of life that's... Motor cars are not sinful. Blacktop is not sinful. The underground is not sinful. But Vincent McNabb, who was a great Irish Dominican preacher in London in the 1930s and 1940s, Vincent McNabb said, the modern city is mortal sin. What do you mean by that? He says, what his meaning is, the modern city is a total way of life in which it's very difficult to avoid mortal sin. It can be avoided. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. So you see the clash between the world from which the modern world came and the modern world. In other words, God's world and the modern world. There's a profound and deep clash. And the answer, a lot of it came from the breakout of Protestantism. Then it went through liberalism, through modernism, and through the Vatican II. So by Vatican II, short before Vatican II, the 1950s, let's say, many Catholics had been living for several generations in this man-made world, in an environment completely structured by man, for man, with no regard for God, and out of touch with God's nature. It doesn't necessarily exclude God. It was still possible to be a Catholic in the 1950s. But many modern people's idea of Catholicism in the 1950s came to be the idea of Hollywood. In other words, the bells of St. Mary's, going my way. You know, what's marvellous about the nun is that she can roll up her sleeves and play tennis just like anybody else. Is that really what makes a nun? Because why? Because otherwise people feel the nun is too distant. There she is in a habit. She's too different from my way of life, and she's sort of condemning my way of life. I don't like having these priests around because I sense... So, what's the temptation for the priests and nuns? Well, they feel that they're not quite fitting in with the world around them. Their temptation is to hike up their skirts and begin dancing with the rest of the world. There is the second volume of Michael Davis's trilogy on, what was it, the Cranmer's Godly Order, Pope John's Council, and Pope Paul VI New Mass. I'm sure some of you know one or two or three of those books. They're very good. The cartoon on the front page, on the cover of the second of those three, which was Pope John's Council, showed the bishops in mitre and crozier and dignified vestments going into the Vatican, and then it showed them coming out again, hiking up their cassocks and beginning to jive and rock and roll with a happy, goofy, stupid expression on their faces. And that was the change that was wrought by Vatican II, and obviously what was behind the change was the idea of getting the clergy and the church in tune with this completely different, natureless, basically godless, modern New World, Hollywood New World. And so the 50sism was that Catholicism which prior to the council, many people were living, everybody was living in the modern world. Practically everybody was living in the modern world, except for a few souls in the convents and monasteries perhaps. But everybody else was living. And the modern world exerts a huge influence. A huge influence. My environment exerts on me a huge influence. It stands to reason. And that modern environment was pulling, all the time, pulling Catholics, pulling at Catholics. It does, to this day, obviously, all of you know what I'm talking about. It pulls at Catholics today. And so the Catholics had, the priests felt that they were out of tune with the people. The people felt that they were being held back by their priests from the enjoyments and the pleasures of the modern world. They kidded themselves that the modern world is not all that bad, that it's really quite innocent, that it's really quite a good thing. It's glamorous, it's technological, it's advanced, it's progressive. You've got to move with the times, you can't, and so on and so on and so on. And therefore the priests and the people all agreed, so to speak, they were all ready to agree that the church needed to be completely changed. And that's what I call 50sism. People were not yet, they hadn't yet fallen, but they walked to the very edge of the cliff. They'd quite deliberately walked to the edge of the cliff. They were looking over and enjoying what they saw, and so they all jumped. The great mass of them jumped. And it wasn't only the bishops. There were, of course, a number of Catholics who didn't like what happened. There were a number of priests that didn't like the council. There were a lot of laity that didn't like the council. There were two bishops we know who didn't like the council. Well, there are many more actually. But those that resisted were crushed by Paul VI. Paul VI, when the council got going, and when the council was finished, Paul VI then began strong-arming the church, really strong-arming to get the church into the new church, to change the church into the new church. New church spelled as one word. And so there was resistance, but it certainly wasn't the majority. And many ended up going along with it. There was some resistance, but it couldn't really take form, take shape, until, well, there were some good priests, make no mistake. You could name several in the United States and in other countries who resisted, who stayed with the old Mass, who kept on saying the old Mass, and who refused to say the new Mass. There were such. But individual priests couldn't do much until there was a bishop to stand and lead. And that was Archbishop Lefebvre. And I can remember in the 1970s, he began the seminary in, I think, 1970, 69, 70. He began the famous seminary of Econ, and began with small numbers. He had only a ragtag and bobtail of teachers in the seminary, a few older priests that came and joined to help crank up the staff of for his seminarians. I can remember that just as each hammer blow descended upon the seminary, some of the older priests packed their bags and ran away. But just as he had too few older priests, his young priests began coming online. And they began teaching in his seminaries, and it worked. It worked, morally. It worked. So his young priests were just in time to take the place of the older priests who wouldn't stay. But the older priests were still influenced by this mentality of obedience. this terrible obedience. What Archbishop Lefebvre said was to have made the whole, what a masterstroke of Satan, to have made the whole church disobedient in the name of obedience. Meaning, to make the whole church obey men instead of obeying God, forgetting obedience to God. I can remember many things from the seminary of the 1970s. What was another thing I was just thinking of? Oh yeah, what I was going to say was, I remember from that time, he said, the Archbishop used to say, if only he could have found another half dozen bishops to take a stand with him, only half a dozen would have been enough to throw a major monkey wrench into the works of the revolution of Paul VI. It was a revolution that overthrew the Catholic Church and made the new church as you now have known it, as we have now known it, which is not Catholic, which is it's a new religion. It's a religion of man. It's the religion of man in the place of the religion of God, and that's again a religion of the modern world in place of the religion of God. A religion of industry and technology instead of the nature of God. One reason for thinking seriously of getting back into the country, if you can, there may be many reasons why you can't. I've trained for this job, which only exists in amongst the high-rises. I'm going to have to live in a high-rise. I can't move out of the country. Fair enough. God will not hold it against you if you don't move out of the country. But if you have the possibility, stop and think. Look before you lead when it comes to moving out into the country. In the country you've got much more chance of living among the things of God than among the things of man. You've got much more chance of having an environment of God for the religion of God as opposed to an environment of man that makes war on the religion of God. But you've got to look before you lead. Here's another fact. I have a friend in Canada who moved way out into the country in another province of Canada in the idea of starting up a Catholic sort of village or group out in the country. Didn't work. They didn't have a priest. They had a priest that visited them only, I think, once or twice a month. And otherwise the families were left amongst themselves. The families began, each family looks after its own interest. There began clashes amongst the family. It failed. It was the right idea, but you need more than just the right idea. So what you've got then, Fifticism is a lot of Catholic laity and Catholic priests pressured, softly pressured, subtly pressured, deeply pressured by the whole modern world to think in tune with man instead of thinking in tune with God. And therefore they're ready to abandon the religion of man, to abandon the religion of God for the religion of man. And that's what happens with Vatican II. And what you've got now is exactly the same modern world, only even more so. You know how much technology has advanced since the 1950s. In the 1950s, Elvis Presley was new. He was the first white rock and roller. He was very good. But it was a new kind of music, and as the Chinese proverb says, when the mode of the music changes, the walls of the city shake. Elvis Presley was a revolution in music. And don't underestimate music. A revolution in music meant a revolution in the hearts and minds. That's what it means. So the 1950s, television was just coming in. And there was no question of abortion. And euthanasia, same-sex marriage, these things just not even thought of, hardly thought of. Practiced perhaps on the QT because the principles were still good and the legislation was still good. And the legislators the United States was a decent country in the 1950s. There was the general decency which the young generation today has no knowledge of. The oldsters, we oldsters, know what there was. The youngsters today, it's a world that's gone. The 60s were a tremendous revolution. Therefore, if we accuse the 50s of having caused Vatican II, can we be surprised that the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s have caused the society to go soft? That's the process at work. It's a soft, get into a motor car. It's the modern world. I'm not saying we should never stop getting into motor cars. All I'm saying is that every time we're getting into a motor car, we're paying a little price, and that little price adds up with all the modern things that I use and get used to and that enter my soul and that I admire and that I value. I've got to be careful how I admire the things of the modern world to make sure they don't get in between me and God. So, can we be surprised if the 70s, 80s, 90s, the society began in the 70s with a marvelous, a real man of God, the Archbishop Lefebvre, a real man of God. He had his failings. Let's idolize him. Let's make an idol of him. But he was a real man of God. He had the essentials were in place. He stuck to the religion of God, and he understood the modern world. He understood all of this in depth. He learned it at the seminary from his great teacher, Father Lefloc, and he taught it to the youngsters. And the youngsters, and here's the problem with the Society of Pius X. The youngsters all went to seminary. These young men of the 70s and 80s, they went to the seminary and they sat down on the benches in the seminary. Ooh, Archbishop Lefebvre, Echo, ooh. And they sat there and they learned, everything they learned, and they wrote it all down. They wrote it down in notebooks. They learned by heart their notebooks. Archbishop Lefebvre, Echo, ooh, 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 ooh. And then they came out of the seminary. We are the best. Ooh. I'm caricaturing. I'm making fun, obviously, but there's that side to it. And then the Archbishop died. As long as he was there, he kept reminding people, and he held it together, like Pius X held the church together in the 1900s. Archbishop Lefebvre held the society together for as long as he lived, because he was a charismatic figure. He was obviously a man of God, a deeply Catholic man. Everybody admired him. Once they'd understood what he was about, everybody admired him. But once he was dead, well, then the world began gnawing away again. G-N-A-W-I-N-G. This total environment, which had been the environment of these good youngsters, these good young men, before they went to the Archbishop's seminary. The glamour of this as the Archbishop wore off. His teachings, well, yes, but... And so, little by little by little, the society, the leaders of the society began to slip, and so the society is now going the way of all flesh. It seems to me, it so stands to reason. It's so understandable. I don't know what to say. In French, they say tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. So if you understand everything, you forgive everything. There's some sense in that saying. And if you understand, the world is really rather nice. The modern world is really rather nice. Hey, these leaders of the society, gosh, yes, they have a point. Do you know what? I think I might as well tomorrow or the day after become a liberal myself. After all, it would make life easier. I wouldn't have to swim against the current so much any longer. You see the temptation? The temptation is very easy. The world, the flesh, and the devil. The religion of man, pride. The religion that fits the modern world, the world. The world, the flesh, the devil. The world, all around us. The devil, pride. Man-centeredness as opposed to God-centeredness. The flesh, well, we know where that is all over the place today. So that's where perhaps the society is coming from. What's the solution? Well, the solution, Solzhenitsyn said, and Dr. White loves quoting Solzhenitsyn, Solzhenitsyn said, the division between good and evil does not go between this power block and that power block. The division between good and evil does not go between this party and that party in this country. The division between good and evil does not go between my friends and my enemies inside this party. The division between good and evil goes right down the middle of my own heart. And therefore the solution to the problems of the modern world is what I am going to do about my own sinfulness. That's the start. And what am I going to start? How am I going to start? Prayer, of course. But remember always the old proverb, pray but keep rowing to shore. In other words, prayer, yes, but also my own effort. Pray but keep rowing to shore. Otherwise, if you just sit in the boat and do nothing, you're going to drift away from shore, you're going to drown. So you pray, but then the other proverb says, God helps those who help themselves. So what are we going to do besides praying to help ourselves? Well, that's another discourse. But it starts with ourselves. It moves on to our family, which is the importance perhaps of what we're doing here these few days. And only after that, if the person in the family, if I am responsible for a family, I look after my own soul. I look after my family, and then I will see what I can do to hold myself and my family against this total environment of today, which is not good, and it's not going to get any better, and it's going to perhaps come after us and persecute us. And Father Voigt says we better prepare for martyrdom, and I'm not sure that's. I basically agree. God may not ask us to be martyrs, but He may well. It's going to be all or nothing. And since I'm no longer in the pulpit, then I think I can sing it. With me, it's all or nothing. And if you remember the old song from Oklahoma. No half and half romance will do. With God, it's all or nothing. And that's the bottom line. And the 50s, it was a half and half romance with God. And God said that won't do, and He punished us with the 1960s and with the collapse of the church. And now He's punishing the society because there are not enough priests, not enough laity in the society who recognize that with God a half and half romance won't do. It's our problem. God bless.
We'll do a 2 minutes break, and then we'll have it at 10:15.